It's true, Christian, that Britain once had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. But that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. We wish your daughter a very happy 18th birthday. We're sorry that we have taken her father away from the celebration for the purposes of this meeting, but I feel sure that she will understand. It's true that we are not what we were. Some of us are old enough to be able to say that World in Action is no more, that Panorama is a parody of its former self, that Channel 4 News is a parody of its former self. Some of us are even old enough to remember when The Guardian was a liberal progressive newspaper, and now it is a sewer of disinformation, from Venezuela to Julian Assange to Jeremy Corbyn and so many other things. I have no idea how any self-respecting journalist remaining on The Guardian can possibly justify its metamorphosis from a butterfly back into a slug. Our next speaker is a redoubtable activist for Julian Assange, day after day, week after week, outside that embassy. What's that embassy going to do now? Who's going to go there anymore? But it was once the center of our universe. Please welcome Emmy Butlin.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And I'd like to extend my thanks to the organizers for asking me to come and speak tonight. What am I doing here? I mean, I'm one of you. I should be sitting there. But they've invited me because myself and others, who a lot of them I recognize in the audience, and I'm very glad to see, have been, for the last several years, been holding a solidarity vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy, where we have witnessed indirectly the ordeal of Julian Assange and the struggle of WikiLeaks up close. We have witnessed the police operation, the surveillance operation out there over the years, the money wasted, and we've seen a very young organization and an outstanding man never giving up and resisting and inspiring us day after day to return and stand there in solidarity because we were inspired by him. Our work continues. The fact that he has left the embassy doesn't mean that we stop our work in his support. I've received tremendous encouragement by the public over the years. We've been standing there, speaking to the passers-by, informing them of the latest, and overwhelmingly the British public and international public have been in support of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. It was not surprising for me to again and again get confirmation of my own beliefs in people's own words, stopping by to get an update. You wouldn't know reading the local newspaper or the national newspaper, but overwhelmingly people have inherently understood that WikiLeaks is a good thing, and they inherently understand that the troubles that Julian Assange finds himself and WikiLeaks as an organization is a direct effect of imperialism. We're here today, we're talking about imperialism on trial. But what is this all about? It's about information as a resource. Information that WikiLeaks has released for free to the public, for the public good. And other powers, greater powers, imperialistic powers, are trying to control. to control as a resource, in the same way they try to control oil, in the same way they try to precious metals, etc. Information is very powerful. Information gives you the opportunity to act with knowledge, playing level field in the international political arena, but also personally in our everyday lives. People understand that inherently. It's a battle for knowledge. And people who stopped with us over the years were first to say, he's in there because of the United States. We know. Now we've moved on, obviously. The Ecuadorian embassy is no longer the pole that brought us together. But over the years, a great number of us have realized that by working together, we can definitely do the best that we can. Standing alone is not as effective. So my appeal today, standing here as one of you, is to please join us and mobilize. There is an awful lot of things that we can do, each and every one of us, just like we've been doing over the years. I've got a notebook with Charlotte and a piece of paper, and please be so kind as to jot down your email addresses. We'll put you on our email list and join our actions. What are our actions? Very simply, solidarity. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock at Westminster Magistrates Court, when the first hearing for the US extradition takes place, we're going to be there with posters, with banners, with flyers, and we're going to chant, and we're going to flood the public gallery respectfully I say, because this is an important legal battle. We don't want to interfere with it. But make our voice heard. There will be groups and groups and scores of journalists. There will be a huge number of microphones, just like this one that I'm talking at the moment. Let's step up to the microphone, you and I and everyone else that is joining us, and make our voices heard. We are the public. We matter. We don't have to wait for 5 years or next time we have election in order to make how we feel on this very, very important battle known. We can do it tomorrow. The microphones will be set. Let's be the protagonists in this story, the public. At the same time, there are other ways of helping. There are other ways of expressing yourself. If you don't feel or you're unable to attend our meetings, please write to your Member of Parliament. They need to understand how you feel. This is a major political issue. It's not a legal issue. It's a political issue, as very well the previous speakers have set out. We, the public, need to alert our Members of Parliament of our opinions. This is the limitations of our democracy, but whatever tool we have available, let's use it and write to our Members of Parliament, make this an election issue. George Galloway, very exciting news tonight about making this an electoral issue for him. Let's ask our Members of Parliament to do the same. Even if they disagree, even if you know that, there's not a chance, try to let your opinions know. Again and again and again and again. The hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who stood by the Solidarity Vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy and expressed themselves, if every single one of them had written a letter to their Member of Parliament, we'd have thousands upon thousands of people knocking at doors. Now it's the time. And I welcome you all to join our action, and let's make the difference for Julian Assange and for WikiLeaks, because, he's an inspiring group of people, and they're working for us. If Julian Assange was looking after number one, he wouldn't be where he is at the moment. He has sacrificed absolutely everything. The least we can do, since we are so excited about his publications, is to support him in these difficult times. So I would like to stop here and thank you very much for coming. And please keep writing and circulating that list with your emails. So thank you very much.
Emmy rightly reminds us that the title of this meeting is Imperialism on Trial. And in so doing, she reminded me of something I shall spare their blushes. Someone said to me back in 2002, in the Stop the War Coalition, in the great fight to stop our rulers from committing the disaster that they did commit in invading and occupying Iraq. Someone asked me, can you stop using the word imperialism? It's so old-fashioned. It's so 19th century. Well, anyone watching the news over the last few days from Venezuela knows that imperialism is still alive and kicking, but it's not unbeatable. The Americans don't do coups like they used to back in the day, Christian. The masses in Venezuela and the honorable, loyal, and patriotic armed forces have stopped John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, and Donald Trump in their tracks on the streets of Caracas. So it's alive and kicking and dangerous, but it's not unbeatable. Not at all unbeatable. And neither is this fight on which we are now entered and fully engaged over yet. The next speaker is another whistleblower from inside the machine. He could have had a comfortable retirement. He might have been knighted. He might even have ended up in the House of Lords. He certainly would have ended up on the comfortable dinner party circuit of the establishment, for he was, after all, one of Her Majesty's esteemed ambassadors. But he chose instead to stand up against the lies, the disinformation, the terrorism, the regime change operation mounted by, amongst others, our own government, of which he was once a part. Please welcome His Excellency Peter Ford.
Thank you very much, George, for that warm introduction. Very hard for me to live up to your kind words, but let us get to the point. Thank you all for being here this evening. I know we're all very concerned about Julian, but with our concern, we must keep in mind at the same time the cause or causes for which Julian has been suffering, and that cause is the struggle against imperialism. As George has rightly said, that term imperialism, it sounds anachronistic, but you have to call the beast by its name. That is part of its modus operandi. They try to act under the radar. They don't like people to call the empire by its name. And what we're seeing at the moment is a wounded beast, an empire which is striking back. But the forces of the people have not had the last word yet. That is why we're here tonight. Looking back to 2010, that avalanche of leaks from WikiLeaks, that rocked the foundations of imperialism, really rocked the foundations, the sheer scale of the revelations and the immensity of the atrocities that were revealed, particularly about the behavior of US forces in Iraq, the torture, the indiscriminate killings. Ordinary people's opinion and imaginations were grabbed by these leaks. So the empire really was being rocked on its foundations. And let's not forget that it was partly because of that groundswell of genuinely popular opposition to war, unnecessary war, that helped to bring Donald Trump to power. Was he not, as candidate Trump, the guy who was going to bring the troops home, going to end the never-ending wars? Wasn't that the platform? The platform that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks had helped create, had paved the way for that groundswell of opinion on which Trump rode to power. The Judas Trump, this pathetic man who is now the plaything of the warmongers, who, once he got into power, forgot all his previous declarations, invited into the house of power the warmongers, the John Boltons, the Mike Pompeos, the deep state, the physical manifestations of the deep state, of the permanent military security government, which really governs America and arguably this country and France as well. He brought these people into his house and let himself be led by the nose by them. Partly let himself be led into worsening relations with Russia. This was another irony, because the candidate Trump had argued for having good relations with Russia, but he's presided over an administration which has seen relations go to their worst point in many, many years. And it's ironic that while Russia itself has been moving away from the communist, very dogmatic, doctrine-driven, authoritarian approach, America has been moving closer to that model. and don't think that America doesn't have an equivalent to communism, doesn't have an ism. It does, and that is imperialism, or by its scholarly name, American exceptionalism. This is the term that's used by scholars, and it's not a term of opprobrium. It's boasted about by many Americans. They see America as the beacon on the hill, the country created with God's help, the hand of providence, bringing supreme values to the rest of humanity, with their 700 military bases and their immense bullying economic power to impose sanctions on dozens and dozens of poorer, weaker countries. That is American exceptionalism at work. And here's the thing. The believers in this creed believe in it more than Russians, or very few Russians, actually believed in communism, because Americans imbibe this with the mother's milk that America was born to lead. And doesn't it get under your skin when people refer to the President of the United States as the leader of the free world? I mean, we must be grateful to Trump, because he has embodied the stupidity of this and shown us how weak and feeble we are for even accepting the concept that the President of the United States. We must give him a warm welcome when he comes to London I'm sure you will have some events to mark that august event. Syria has been at the receiving end of much of this American imperialism of recent years. It's as though the Iraq war never happened. We're hearing the same or similar lies about use of weapons of mass destruction. In Syria's case, alleged use of chemical weapons shown by independent experts to be fake. I don't need to go into detail about that now, but the Americans have made a bad situation worse in Syria. Not content with having spoiled Iraq and helped to generate the beginnings of ISIS, which then spread to Syria. No, they had to make the situation in Syria worse by putting their own troops in northern Syria and now refusing to withdraw them. Trump, in a rare moment of lucidity back in December, announced out of the blue that he was going to withdraw the troops. Cue the most awful caterwauling on the part of the establishment. The minions of the deep state leapt into action in this country as well, and in newspapers like The Guardian. And incidentally, doesn't that typify the immense move to the right of elites worldwide since actually 2010, since the Iraq war? Who would have imagined in 2010 that the Americans would start or be instrumental in starting another 3 wars in the Middle East, plus Venezuela, Syria, Yemen, and virtual war with Iran already, plus now Venezuela kicking off. No, the empire has struck back powerfully, and I greatly fear now what is possibly going to happen with Iran. America is effectively at war with Iran, and they're blatant about it. The economic warfare of sanctions is designed to bring Iran to its knees. And America will not take yes for an answer. The independent international watchdog on nuclear weapons has crawled over Iran and given them a clean bill of health. They've been respecting the Iran nuclear agreement that was concluded by Obama. But the Americans will not take yes for an answer. They want regime change in Iran. And we must be very vigilant and do what we can to keep our own government from being dragged into yet another unnecessary conflict. I'll conclude on that note. I just want to express my own hopes that tomorrow the judges will be aware of opinion in this country. I'm not overly hopeful, but in 2010, Julian and WikiLeaks' team helped to kick off something very, very important. They rocked the foundations of imperialism. The counterattack has been underway for several years and is now coming to a climax. That's why it's so important that we be here tonight and make our voices heard. Thank you.
His Excellency Peter Ford mentioned a rare moment of lucidity on the part of President Trump. I felt I witnessed its reverse on Twitter last night, where President Trump makes most of his most important announcements. In the wake of the failure of his coup in Venezuela, he threatened Cuba with economic sanctions. No one appears to have told the leader of the free world that Cuba has been under total US sanctions for 60 years. And that President Eisenhower was in the White House when they were imposed. And Cuba will still be standing when President Trump is a distant, if hilarious, memory. Now, many rogues have come out of Oxford. I don't need to list them, up to and including Tony Blair. But some of the finest people in England come out of Oxford too, and none finer than our next speaker, a novelist, a chronicler, a writer, a journalist, and yes, an activist, the one and only Neil Clark.
Actually, there's a change of plan. Neil Clark's been delayed a bit, so my name's Tony, okay, and hi, I'm a peace envoy, you know. You may have heard of me. All the countries I get involved in end up being broken up into pieces. I've come here tonight. First of all, you know, congratulations to my friend George Galloway, who's announcing he's standing in Peterborough. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm going to be standing there too. No, I mean, look. I mean, you know, imperialism. Greg Sharkey, you know, invited me tonight because he wanted, you know, imperialism on trial. He wanted somebody to put the case for imperialism, and I'm so happy to do this. I even arranged with him a cut in my usual speaking fee to just £250,000 tonight. I'm doing this, so I think there's going to be a whip round later on, the audience. Imperialism. What's not to like? You know, you go into countries, okay, you topple them, the leaders, you get puppet leaders in place. The first thing they do is they take a big loan out from the IMF, the World Bank, and then you go in and you take the assets of the country. I see it as liberation, what we do, because we're liberating the people and those countries from their assets. That's what we do, and we do it because we you know, it's about exploitation. It's about exploiting the people. I mean, it's about exploiting the country's resources, and we can do that better. You know, I mean, what's the point of having a Yugoslav national oil company or an Iraqi national oil company? Much better off if the likes of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, you know, are running the show, isn't it? Much better off. You know, and George is here. George, you know, I put it to you bluntly. Okay? If George Galloway had been British Prime Minister in 2003, we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. Can you imagine if we hadn't done that? Can you imagine where we'd be today? You know, I tell you where we'd be today. Saddam Hussein would still be there in his palace with his weapons of mass destruction, which could be assembled and launched within 45 minutes, threatening the entire world. That's where we would be today if people like George Galloway had been the Prime Minister instead of me. He wouldn't have gone into Libya, he wouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. Just think what the world would be like if we hadn't done those things. How unsafe it would be. We'd have, you know, terrorist groups putting bombs everywhere around the world. Thank goodness we've avoided that. You know, and so imperialism, I don't like to use that word. I prefer humanitarian interventionism, because that's really what we like to do. We like to intervene for humanitarian reasons. We intervened in Yugoslavia. We dropped a lot of depleted uranium on the country. You know, it's purely humanitarian what we did there. same as in Iraq, it was humanitarian. Afghanistan, these are all good humanitarian ventures. And that brings us to Julian Assange. You know, I really don't get Julian Assange. I really don't get why we feel so, people here tonight have expressed support for him. You know, he's been exposing war crimes. Okay, why do we want to do that for? Because if you expose war crimes of Britain and America and our allies, you're going to make it harder for us to do these liberations and these humanitarian interventions. So he's getting in the way of operations like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, making it more difficult for people like me and David Cameron and Theresa May, these great leaders, to take us to war. So I think Julian Assange, I think he should be, really, it's really bad what he's doing. I've been in Waitrose, I go to Waitrose. I know George is not a huge fan, but, I'm hoping he'll come along to the Peterborough Waitrose. We can talk about how we can block Brexit together there and all the rest of it. What have I got in Waitrose? Just want to show you. Now, these leaks are okay. These are Waitrose leaks. These are okay. WikiLeaks are not okay. These leaks are good. These leaks will not damage my ability to wage war, to take us to wars. So stick with these leaks and ignore that WikiLeaks stuff, because, it's going to make it much harder for us to go to war. Imperialism or humanitarian interventionism has really got us to where we are today, hasn't it? It's got us to where we are today. Just think back 20, 30 years ago, before we had these humanitarian wars. Just think how dangerous the world was, how, terrorism everywhere. And, okay, in Iraq, we didn't, WMDs, we didn't get them. We weren't to know that Saddam had moved them to Iran. We weren't to know that. And I think confronting Iran at the moment and its weapons of mass destruction is, it's got to be done. You can say do nothing about Iran. You can say let's do nothing about Iran. Okay. Well, you could say that about Iraq. So, I think we need to forget about WikiLeaks and to concentrate on, more regime change wars, more interventions, because clearly this is the way to go. We've got to liberate these countries like Iran, like Cuba, like Venezuela. Venezuela. Venezuela, we've got to liberate Venezuela from its oil, from its resources, get it under the control of Western, people like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, fantastic people who will do the absolute best for the Venezuelan people to improve their living standards. So that's what we've got to be doing, I think, more of. So really, I don't think Julian Assange is somebody we should be spending too much time on, because, he makes it more difficult for people like me to operate. And George is going to be standing in Peterborough on a free Julian Assange platform. I'm going to be doing the opposite. I'm going to be making the case for, clamping down on these kind of people who are inhibiting, trying to hinder these humanitarian interventions. So, if you're far from Peterborough, vote for me and not for this chap, because this chap, we wouldn't have had any of these wars. So how could you possibly want to vote for someone like him? So thank you very much. Indeed, thanks. Thanks. Right, not me. So that's our friend Tony. Getting a little bit serious now. I think it is the case, as George said earlier, in fact, and that there's something wrong. Whether you're left, right, in the middle, whatever, there has to be something wrong when you've got the people who planned and orchestrated these terrible wars, illegal wars, from Yugoslavia onwards, who are free, made lots of money, incredible lots of money, they're free, and the guy who published information which we had a right to know about these wars and other things is in jail. That cannot be right. Whether you're a socialist, a leftist, liberal, whatever you call, you just know it's wrong. And that is the key point. Now, Julian Assange, I wrote an article about him called Julian Assange and the Tale of Tobermory. I don't know if anybody's read this story. Tobermory, from one of my favourite writers, H.H. Munro, otherwise known as Saki, a wonderful Edwardian comic writer who was bang on the money. And his books are so relevant today. Tobermory was a cat that a guest at one of these stately homes or posh houses taught to speak. And Tobermory was telling the guests, the lord and ladies, about the secrets that he'd heard about the cook and the people in the kitchen, the servants, etc. And because he could hear everything they were saying, and he was telling all the secrets downstairs and about the other guests, and they thought it was hilarious. This is wonderful, Tobermory. And then Tobermory started talking about them, about what they'd said about each other, and revealing their secrets. They weren't so happy about that. A day later, Tobermory's dead body was found in the gorse bushes. Tomcat had taken him. That was the story. He didn't live very long. And I sincerely hope that's not what's going to happen to Julian Assange, because everybody loves whistleblowers when they're revealing secrets of other people we don't like. But when they publish information that puts us in bad stead about war crimes in Iraq and elsewhere, then they are pariahs. Just think how Julian Assange was fated in about 2009, 10, 11. Not just The Guardian was fawning over him and publishing his stuff, but he even won a prize from the Index on Censorship. He was fated. Everybody wanted to be with him. But then the stuff started coming out about Western war crimes, and all of a sudden, he's an appalling man. He's a narcissist, he's a sociopath, you name it. This guy that we were told was a good guy when we were hearing information about regimes or governments that we were quite happy to fall, like in Tunisia, okay, the government there is past sell-by date, we don't really care. That's fine. But when WikiLeaks started publishing information about Western war crimes, no. And very interesting point is the character assassination here. Traducing somebody's character is a key part of this imperialism today. This is so important. I've had it done to me. I've been called a lot of things, many of them defamatory. George has suffered more probably than any political figure in Britain until Jeremy Corbyn came along and became leader of the Labour Party, and we all know what's happened there. You know, everything, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite, you're far right, you're far left, you're a Stalinist, you're a fascist, all in sometimes just the one article. You're a genocide denier, you're this, and so this is how it works. And the smear campaign against Julian Assange has been very interesting to analyse as a journalist, because I think Craig Murray made this very good point. Political correctness misused political correctness has played a part to try to prevent the left from coming to Julian's defence, to try to divide the left. And these charges which are, of course, were never brought. Correction, I correct myself. They were never brought, the charges regarding the Swedish case. The allegations, I should say, yes, thanks. These allegations were there. And for me, one of the key revelations, I was speaking to Alexander just earlier, were the leaked CPS, Crown Prosecution Service emails to the Swedish, to say to the Swedish prosecutors, don't you dare get cold feet. That was the actual statement. Don't you dare get cold feet and drop this case. Money isn't an object. And this is quite extraordinary. Anybody who doubts this is political, just think about this. If this man, if he hadn't been connected to WikiLeaks, do we think the CPS would be sending emails to Sweden to say, don't you dare drop this case, don't get cold feet, money's no object? This had been a member of the public with no connection to politics, and this same scenario played out regarding these allegations, we wouldn't have got these emails. So that tells us clearly this is political. And once that's there, the allegations, as we said earlier, we're in this stage now where just to accuse somebody of something is taken as guilt. This is the terrible position we're in at the moment. I have a law degree. When I was studying law, it was innocent till proven guilty, presumption of innocence. That's gone out the window today. You only have got to have somebody from the media saying this person's an anti-Semite, I think he is, and that's it. Condemned as an anti-Semite. That's happening with the Labour Party, a lot of people there. And the same with Julian. You've also got to have allegations which haven't been brought charges, and that's enough. How can you defend this man? Well, actually, he hasn't been charged yet. You know, let alone being found guilty of this. And yet it's still meant to be a toxic allegation that is meant to try to push people away from supporting him. So that's, yes, exactly. And that's where we're in today. We got that, and that's a very unhappy development, that we've lost sight of this innocent till proven guilty, of the presumption of innocence all the way through. Just finally, just to wrap up, I just want to say that to end on a positive note, what we can do, what is to be done, to quote a famous Russian of about 100 years ago, who got things done. What is to be done? Emmy was saying, MPs, writing to the MPs, the one positive to take from this, what's happened to Julian, is that it's happening in a year when very likely or possibly be election. We've got Euro elections coming up, we've got local elections tomorrow. A lot of politicians are feeling very nervous now about their seats with the volatility of the British political situation, the Brexit party being formed, etc., etc. So these MPs, a lot of them will be vulnerable, will be thinking, oh my God, there could be elections soon. It's a very good time, as Emmy said, if everybody in this room writes to their MP tomorrow, just emails their MP, what's your position on Julian Assange? Very interested to know. To let the MPs know that this matters to us. That's so important. And if you think, oh, well, letters to MPs don't really matter, they just ignore us, I just want to end on one thought. Think back to, I think it was 2013, wasn't it, when we looked very much as if we were going to be bombing Syria at the behest of the US. In August 2013, there were allegations of chemical weapons attacks at the Syrian government, and we were building up. This was it, Iraq war again. We have to do something. We've got to get involved. We've got to intervene. And MPs had an unprecedented mailbag then. There was the public mood was so against that. And I'm not saying that was the sole reason why the House of Commons and the Labour Party, in particular the Labour Party, unexpectedly voted against going to war, against airstrikes at that moment. Ed Miliband was the leader. Peter Oborne, my friend, the journalist, said that whatever you think about Ed Miliband, that was Labour Party voting against that was very, very important in the great scheme of things. And that, I think, was largely to do with a very big mailbag a lot of MPs got at that moment. So it can make a difference. We have to make our voices heard on this. And you knew it mattered because just the reaction from the neocon liberal interventionist lobby after that vote, the anger that there was. I remember reading pieces by Andrew Roberts, the historian. I think he said it was the most shameful moment in Parliament since Munich, since that appeasement. Nick Cohen was apoplectically raged. I mean, he always is, but he was even more angry that weekend about this failure to bomb. Ray McGovern, who was on the Crosstalk programme, said that he was in a TV studio with a couple of, I think it might have been Paul Wolfowitz, one of the couple of neocons in America, and they were so unhappy, feeling as if a close family member had died. It really hit the neocon war lobby hard, that failure to bomb, because they knew that was the key moment in the Syrian conflict. Had Britain bombed with the US at that moment, we could have had, Al-Qaeda, ISIS in Damascus. Very different story how it happened, and that would have been another successful operation for the people we're talking about, the war lobby, the endless war lobby. And it was checked. Yes, it was an awful conflict, and nobody wants to deny that, but they didn't get their way in Syria. It was stopped. So it's not infallible. As our speaker earlier for WikiLeaks said, empires don't last forever. There comes a point where they go too far. You could say Aleppo was the Stalingrad of this empire. My friend John White and I both argued that. And so Julian Assange's case is political, and it is incredibly important, really, what happens from now in. So don't be disheartened by today's news. The fight is far from over. What's happened is an injustice when he is imprisoned while others who have committed incredible crimes are free. But if we stick together and if we campaign, we get behind George in his campaign in Peterborough, we all get behind that, and we get behind other MPs who take the same line. People like Chris Williamson has come out in defence of Julian Assange. Get behind these people. We are the many, they are the few. Don't forget that. Thank you.